Voidmage Gamer is now partnered with Flipside Gaming, so you can use the promo code on their website, all caps, Voidmage, to get 10% off all orders $10 or more. It's a great way that you can support both Flipside Gaming and Voidmage Gamer's channel. Hello everyone, welcome back to another 10 underrated Commander cards video. Haven't done one in a while because I wanted to take a little break from the series. I found that the more time I give myself for this series, the better off I am discovering new cards from new sets. But I decided to go back to Commander 2018 since we are very close to the release of Commander 2019. Wanted to talk about what I think are the 10 most underrated, in no particular order, from Commander 2018. And these are going to be cards that were specifically designed for the set, no reprints. They don't have to be amazing cards, but I think they do have some playability. It doesn't have to be universally playable, just as long as it serves a purpose. I think it can be pretty useful, and certainly there are some commanders that fit that description. So let's start it off here with the first card, which is Endless Atlas. Pretty simple 2-mana artifact where you pay 2 mana to draw a card, but you need to control 3 or more lands with the same name. Now the easiest way to do this is to throw it into a monocolored deck. That way you're almost certain to have 3 basic lands with the same exact name. My recommendations would be mono white or mono red, colors where you're probably going to want to have some extra card draw, and you're usually going to have that in the form of colorless artifacts anyway, such as Skull Clamp. So why not add yet another cheap artifact into your deck? It doesn't give you a ton of card draw like Skull Clamp, but it can be quite underrated to pay 2 mana at your opponent's end step to draw a card before you start your turn. And just having that 2 mana available, it's definitely worthwhile when you can speed up your deck, and something like mono white definitely needs more card draw, so it's a staple for me. The next one is Everwatching Threshold. If you're a fan of cards like Propaganda, Ghostly Prison, this is nowhere near as good because it doesn't stop your opponents from attacking you. It might encourage them, however, to not attack you if it means you get to draw a card. It's not as good as if it were every creature attacking you lets you draw a card. It's just whenever an opponent attacks you with 1 or more creatures, so it's not as good as I would want it to be. But if you need extra card draw, it's kind of the same argument for Endless Atlas. Even if it's just 1 extra card draw, that's still valuable if all you need to get to is 1 removal spell or some answer. I think it would work out well if it's one of many cards in a Pillow Fort deck. Being the kind of propaganda effect that draws you cards is not bad. And the next card we have here is the Dalkon Humiliator. I apologize for all the blue haters out there, but there are going to be 3 of them in a row. The Dalkon Humiliator is actually really interesting for artifact synergies. Whenever it attacks, if you control 3 or more artifacts, creatures your opponents control lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1 until end of turn. Blue does this a lot where they can just make creatures insignificant, take away their abilities, can turn them into frogs and silly things like that. But to see this with an artifact synergy is kind of unusual, and it's one of those weird cards that might actually work out well in your deck, especially if you're playing some larger artifact creatures. Let's say you want to actually get in some Infect with your Blightsteel Colossus, or if you want to make sure you can hit an opponent with a Steel Hellkite, this might actually be the creature for you. Yeah, there's a ton of good creatures with good abilities and a large base power and toughness, so taking that away from them could definitely help you if you're going to go with a combat theme for your artifact deck. I think some people stayed away from it for that specific reason because they don't necessarily have a huge combat strategy for their artifact decks. Artifact decks tend to be more combo oriented, but I think it's one of those weird cards that's just kind of cool to play with. And the last blue card that we have to talk about is Primordial Mist. Now I'm not gonna lie, this is more speculation. I don't think it's that good right now, but the Commander 2019 decks, we are supposed to be getting a Morph deck, and seeing as Morph has interactions with face down cards, it is possible that Primordial Mist could see more play. Yeah, Manifest is a little bit different, but having an additional synergy with face down cards could help you out with the upcoming Commander set. Up next we have Loyal Subordinate, a black card. Kind of surprised I didn't see it in a lot of decks because it is one of those lieutenant cards. It's a cheap creature, it's also a zombie, has menace, 3 power creature. It's not too shabby. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, like all the other lieutenants, each opponent is going to lose 3 life. It's just 3 life, but it does add up. and especially that you have the zombie synergies, there's a lot of reasons why you would want to play this card in Commander. And then following that, we have the red card Enchanters Bane. Kind of a risky card, but it is just a 2-mana red enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, target enchantment deals damage equal to its converted mana cost to its controller unless that player sacrifices it. Really meant to be out there on the field when your opponents have enchantments for obvious reasons. You will have to target Enchanter's Bane if nobody else has an enchantment, but that's fine because it's the whole reason why you're playing the card in the first place. There are a ton of good enchantments in the format, and I shouldn't have to tell you guys that. I just mentioned a bunch of them earlier in the video with Propaganda. Even if it is just forcing your opponent to take 3 damage, late game a card like this is so powerful because it might not be a Propaganda, it could be a Doubling Season, it could be a Privileged Position, something with a higher CMC. It's kind of like Loyal Subordinate. It adds up, and I think it's even more political seeing as you can actually target the enchantment. So there's a lot of reasons why you would want to play this in some kind of red-black spiteful deck where you're already playing a lot of burn cards. I think it's a pretty sweet addition to those kinds of decks. And then after that, we have another weird, probably the most obscure card on this whole list, Emissary of Grudges. Flying haste creature, good stats, but a very unique ability where you have to secretly choose an opponent, and if that player has a spell or ability that targets you or a permanent you control, you can then reveal that player, which I'm assuming you would have to write their name down beforehand for obvious reasons. You get to choose new targets for that spell or ability, which is very unusual. We don't see really anything else like this. It's almost something you would expect to see in one of those unsets because of how off the wall it is. Predetermining your opponent's actions takes a lot of thinking. It's probably easiest to choose the control deck, someone with reliable removal, and predict something like a Swords to Plowshares. Being able to choose new targets for something like that is amazing. And yeah, you can only really do it once unless you get to replay it, but you should only really need to do it once if it's something like a Swords to Plowshares. That's really awesome. And if you were able to do it more than once, that could get out of hand. But Emissary of Grudges is just one of those cards that, if you're in red, you're already playing things like Fork that are disrupting your opponent's removal spells, counter spells, and putting your own little twist on them. You know, with red, not everything is going to go as expected, and I think this is a card that just embraces red's philosophy. And then next we have Whiptongue Hydra. This is a card I fell in love with at first because I just love hating on flying creatures, and things like this are almost one-sided board wipes if your opponents have a lot of flyers and you don't. Not only this, but Whiptongue Hydra also gets a ton of +1/+1 counters, so if you're playing a +1/+1 counter themed deck, which are pretty common, Whiptongue Hydra is not a bad addition. And reach is one of the more underrated keywords in Commander because so many people go for the easy flying evasion. Reach is going to save your life more often than not. Pretty simple creature. It's kind of what you want though, ETB removal. Being able to get rid of multiple flyers at the same time is super spectacular. Can't recommend this card enough. Now we go into the actual Commander options. These last 2 cards I think kind of missed the mark for some people. Taunus, Urza's Apprentice is probably the biggest example of this. A really good card when you think about all of the good triggered and activated abilities from artifacts. Maybe not as straightforward when it comes for comboing. Taunus is one of those Commander options I'm kind of scratching my head about because he kind of checks all the boxes for a powerful artifact commander. He takes advantage of good abilities, whether they're triggered or activated. He's super efficient, only 2 mana with haste, so you don't have to worry about speed. And even without Paradox Engine, you still have all of the combo potential that you could have with the same blue artifacts, the ones that can give you infinite mana. You can still throw in Rings of Brighthearth and Basalt Monolith, and go for something like a Walking Ballista. I was almost certain when Commander 2018 came out that Taunus was going to be one of those combo-oriented commanders that everyone was going to try to play, but I was actually surprised to be wrong. He still is, however, a very good commander in artifact decks, because there are a ton of good activated abilities like Burnished Heart that you can absolutely abuse, get 4 lands instead. There's of course things like Solemn Simulacrum and Skull Clamp, good quality artifacts in Commander, in addition to things like Combustible Gearhulk. Taunus is ridiculous if you build around him correctly. And then the last card is Gyrus, Waker of Corpses. He has been next to completely ignored. I mean, even Thantis the War Weaver, as weird as that is, has seen a lot more play than Gyrus. And the main turnoff is probably that you have to exile the creatures from your graveyard. If you didn't have to do that, Gyrus would be perfect. But I still am attracted to the idea of having a combat-themed graveyard deck in Jund colors. That still appeals to me. And I would like to think with the new Gargus deck, there would be some emphasis on the Hydra aspect of this creature soon, because you never know. We have seen some commander cards in the past see more playability because of new cards introduced, and Gyrus is one of those Hydras that I think could fit in well if you were to make a multicolored Hydra deck. So keep an eye open for Gyrus in future commander decks. New commander options might take advantage of Gyrus better than Gyrus can take advantage of himself in his own commander deck. I'm still looking to build a tech around this guy. I'm gonna admit he's not the best out of Lord Windgrace and Thantis, but when you're able to just ambush people, that's still got to be worth something, right? But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you think about these 10 underrated commander cards. This was pretty much the Commander 2018 edition of my underrated commander card series. I'll try to do more of these, hopefully incorporate some of the newer cards. Take it easy. You all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.